Okay, this is the next episode in the podcast, All Apologies, Guilt, and Blame. It's the third book in my series, Life Beyond Silence. The first book was titled Not a Victim, a Survivor, Life Beyond Domestic Violence and Rape. The second one was titled Losing Touch with Reality. You can most definitely find my first book on Barnes & Nobles and many other sites, including Amazon. I think the reason I did the podcast in the first place was to kind of finalize everything, add my thoughts now after so many years, after having written them, and motivate me to go ahead and put the second and third book up on Amazon. I think doing the podcast has also been therapeutic because it's given me a way to talk about my feelings now compared to then. And hopefully it gives listeners the ability to comment or ask me questions about my life and why I came to the realization of how I feel now. Anyway, so let's get started. So in the last episode, I was kind of finishing up about how I did the whistleblower thing on the physician that I used to work for, and how I had eventually moved to the Nashville area. I never had much money in my life. Never. All I ever did was basically live paycheck to paycheck and try to stay above water. Even by the time I got to Nashville, I was working and trying to pay my bills, and I lived a pretty comfortable life, I would say, but I had a lot of health problems starting to, I guess you would say, rear their ugly head. In this episode, I guess I will catch you up on my medical conditions and where I was at the point that I left off. I had just gotten the money. I was working. I was living paycheck to paycheck. And the money came in at the end of 2017. This is all new. So you're hearing what happened after. But basically the money came in and I was in like a holding pattern. To be honest, I knew that the lawyers had to be paid. I knew that I had to pay the IRS a chunk of it. And by the time I totaled everything up, it was substantial, but not what technically I got. It's hard to explain, but it says on paper a lot more than what I actually got. Let's put it that way. But I was working and I was having a lot of medical issues. Now, if you look back in my episodes that I've already done, I did know that I was pre-diabetic when I moved to Tennessee. And I also knew that I was in cardiac failure, heart failure, for not taking care of my heart. And my heart I was having extreme high blood pressure. Now, if someone has high blood pressure, let's say 160 over 90, that's critical, basically. That's really, really too high. But there were times mine was like 190 over 100, which is enormous. And it even got over 200 at one point. It was like at one point, let's say 205 over, I don't know, let's say 105. I think it was 120 though. And it was stroke level, like something really bad could have happened. But I guess lucky for me, it didn't. And I managed to get it down. I was on quite a lot of cardiac medicines. And I managed to get my blood pressure down, and it would just go up, half of the time, and half of the time it wouldn't. It fluctuated drastically. But, the cardiologists were trying their best to handle it, but they weren't happy. And I was having chest pain, especially when it was really high. And my doctor suggested I have a heart cath, which is a heart catheterization where they go through your groin and go up, and basically they put dye in your heart and see if there's any blockages. And during that whole process, if they find one, they can put a stent, which is kind of like, I don't know, rotor-rooter, let's say, in plumbing. It goes into the place that there's a blockage and expands and makes an opening where maybe it was blocked before. And a lot of people get heart stents, but I didn't want to have the heart cath at that time. I wanted to continue to wait and see what happens, I guess. And he suggested a 3D image of my heart, and I agreed to it. And they did a CTA or CCTA, whichever, but they did a basically it's a CT of your heart, but it's 3D. So you're in this machine and they give you the dye, and it's a real good image all the way around and inside the heart. And if they see a blockage, if the radiologist sees a blockage, he puts it on the report. Well, he did see a blockage, and he suggested a heart cath. So I agreed to have it. And I did not know that my physician, my cardiologist, was not going to be the one doing it. I don't know why I didn't know that. I know there's plenty of cardiologists that actually do that, but I guess the one I had, he had a preferred surgeon that did it. And I was a little disappointed in that, to say the least, but I did have the heart cath, and he didn't do anything. The one that I didn't know, the one that was actually doing the heart cath. And you're in twilight when you have it. So my cardiologist came to my bedside and said, well, you do have a significant blockage, but we didn't do anything. We didn't put a stent or anything. And we're just going to watch it because it needs to be above 70%, and you're like in the 60s. And I'm like, what? Like, I've worked healthcare 43 years, and some of that has been in cardiac care. And I was just like, what? It's above 60, but a little below 70, and you can't do it until it's 70. So what am I supposed to do? And he said, well, you'll still have all your symptoms. You'll still have high blood pressure. And if you do have a heart attack, we want you to get back in here so we can do something. But we're basically just going to watch it. So I was upset. Like, my kids They were upset. I was upset. And I was like, well, you know, I don't know what to do. I mean, they did it. They decided not to put a stent in, and they just want to wait for my heart attack. So I guess that's what I'm doing. And I said, but if I'm ever out and I have a heart attack and I kill people, like run into their cars or whatever, make sure you sue them for deciding that it's okay for me to walk around, when I've seen plenty of people that ended up getting a stent because they did a heart cath and they found a significant blockage. But evidently, I don't know. I said, maybe there is a 70% divide. And this doctor, even though I was close to it, decided percent-wise, I still was below 70. I said, I don't know. I don't know. Guess I'll just wait for my heart attack. So that was 2018. And I was fit to be tied. I was more anxious than ever. I was obsessed with it. I'll admit it. I was obsessed. Like, even my kids were like, okay. And they were like, fine with it. But I was like, what the hell? I'm taking all these medications. I'm spending lots of money. I'm going to the doctor literally all the time. Somebody I'm seeing literally all the time. And I guess I'll just walk around with this chest pain. And it was, my medical file, I'm sure, is pretty thick, because there was damage continuing to happen to my heart because of my blood pressure being that high for so long. And yet it's also high. It's also got a blockage. I'm also in cardiac failure. I'm also an unstable diabetic. I guess they call it uncontrolled diabetes. Anyway, so I was mad. And like I said, obsessed with it, and drowning in my anxiety, I guess. And here I have this money and I don't know what to do, And at the time, in 2018, there's probably 1,000 things I should have done, but didn't. And the reason I say that is because it was 2018, and in 2020, that is when everything exploded. Like, that's when COVID happened. And that's a whole nother episode. But what I'm trying to get over in this episode is to tell you that here I have this money, and I really don't know what to do with it. How to make more money from that money. And my lawyer, he said, it's significant, and you've never had this kind of money, but you need to get a CPA, you need to pay your IRS bill, and what you have left, you need to settle all your debts. And remember that whatever you have left after everything is something that it's something for you for the rest of your life. And, looking back, Of course, everybody looking back prior to 2020 probably should have, could have, would have done the right thing, and they would have invested or, I don't know, acquired property. That's probably what I should have done. I probably should have bought like a business and bought the whole business or property, because everything's just exploded since COVID. But I didn't. I kind of sat on it. I was very skeptical of the stock market. I think everybody should be skeptical. Because looking back, this is when Trump was president, and it was, I just didn't trust different things that people were asking me if I wanted to do. And I just kind of sat on it, which, like I said, is probably something I shouldn't have done. But I did help my mother, and I helped my children, basically the last two children. Of course, the first one's my oldest, and if you've listened to my podcast, there's no reason for me to bring all that back up. But my second one is stable, and she's happily married and has two of my grandkids, and she's living a good life. And my youngest daughter had some bills and that I tried to clear up for her, along with my son. And of course, I cleared up my bills. But since then, I've collected more bills. But I still am reluctant to invest or do something like that. I just can't see myself doing that. It's just because I guess I'm clueless in that area and skeptical, and probably rightly so. So I kind of just wanted to tell you where I was at that point with all my health conditions. I also will offer some advice. If you do have significant high blood pressure, please go see a doctor. And if you are in a cardiologist care and you're on a lot of medication, I feel for you, because I was too. I was on a lot of medication. And there I had this blockage that I was scared to death of. But, what are you going to do? Your doctor looks at you, he knows you're a nurse, and he's like, if you're having a heart attack. If you have the heart attack, get to the hospital. And I was just thinking, I've also known people that just die. Okay, so sorry I had to take a moment. Anyway, after I was told to just go home and wait till I had my heart attack or until the blockage grew, I was upset. Just to say the least, I was upset. I was actually more obsessed with it than I would say anything. I felt like nobody cared, that the doctor had let me down. We had talked about my LAD, which is the widowmaker artery, being blocked. We had talked about having a Lima done. We had talked about open heart surgery and what that would entail. We talked about a lot of stuff, and I just felt let down, and I was obsessed with it. And you got to understand, it was hard for me to continue working. And I basically went on medical leave and then later decided to quit working. It was just too much. I was in a lot of pain. I was stressed out. I was depressed. I was anxious. I had a lot of anxiety. I was not getting around very good. And it was hard for me to work full days. And I had used up all of my sick leave. I had used up all of my personal leave. And I just finally went on and went to medical leave. Okay, so after a certain period of time, they want you to make a decision. Are you coming back, or are you going to resign? And I just decided to resign for health reasons. And I did so. And, you know, it is what it is. I felt that making the decision that I had to make due to health reasons was at the time the best thing for me to do. Looking back, knowing that COVID eventually happened and a lot of people got to work from home, yeah, that was difficult because I probably could have done something like that. But at the time, my health was more important, and I was under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and I was a ticking time bomb. Anyway, so I ended up going to see a therapist at some point. You know, I would say it was sometime during the last part of 2018, maybe sooner. But I would say I saw her for about a year. And quite often, too. But I went to a psychiatrist first just because I was really depressed and really anxious. And I really didn't think I needed medicine just because I'm leery of those kinds of medicines. I did try them, but they didn't seem to like really help that much. I was just too, you know how some people say they're like knotted up inside or too stressed. They feel like they're a rubber band stretched to the max, or they're hanging from a ledge. Yeah, I just was stressed out. And yes, I was depressed too, but to me, I was just tightly wound, or wound too tight, I guess that's the phrase. But um, I did end up going to therapy, and I went in there to complain about my health and the fact that I was wound too tight and depressed and anxious and stressed out to the max. And we ended up talking, and she was very sweet and very nice, but she ended up kind of listening the way you're listening to my story. She listened to my story as well. And she's like, well, I know you came for your medical conditions, but I think a lot of how you're feeling and a lot of your anxiousness and anxiety comes from your past. And, you know, I tried to tell her I didn't think so, that I wrote all these books a long time ago and that I just didn't feel a need to talk about it. I just didn't feel like it got me anywhere to do that. Me talking about it and about the book, just like me talking to you all, I feel like it's therapy to talk about it, but I feel like her pointing it out, it doesn't get me anywhere anymore. You know, it never did. But I used to think that it would get me somewhere to get it out. But now, after all these years, I've told the story over and over again. And I'm at peace. I think that I still harbor the way I felt, I guess. But I don't know. I think you get to a point where it's old. It gets old. It gets to where it's repetitive so much that you just like, okay, you know, this happened. This is why it happened. I'm to blame for everything. I'm guilty. It hurt. I felt in pain for so long. And I wrote about it and I've talked about it. And I don't know that it does very much more to talk about it. At least with her, I was like saying that and saying, what do you want me to say? You know, with you, it's different. like doing these podcasts, it kind of finalizes things for me. But with her, the therapist, I mean, it was like she wanted me to go over it and ask me how I felt, ask me if I knew that that dysfunction that I felt when I was a child carried on. And I said, no, not really. I said, I kind of realized that I had family dysfunction, but pretty much by the time I was a rebellious teen and doing all the things that I did and going through my marriages and everything, I just realized I was my worst enemy. And I was the one that was digging my hole or grave or however you want to put it. I was the one that was throwing gasoline on the fire. Everything I did turned to shit. So I just accepted it. And her thing was she wanted me to talk about, and she wanted to point out that what I did as a child, even if as a teen, stemmed from the dysfunction. And yes, I was to blame for all the repetitive mistakes that I had made as an adult, where I just always found the wrong men, always ignored the red flags, always went left when I should have gone right. But she said that it does make sense if you look back and look at how much I wanted to be happy. And I wanted to find someone that loved me and took care of me, you know. And yeah, I did all the wrong things. That's true. But she was like focused on telling me that, you know, it's over and I'm a different person. And I did survive a lot. And she just wanted me to acknowledge that I'm intelligent enough, I guess, to realize a lot about what I went through. And the fact that I could do that said a lot. That I could put it into words, that I could put it on paper, that I could talk about it, that I could understand it. Because a lot of people that go through abuse and dysfunction, they do turn to drugs. They do turn to self-harm. They do turn to substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or anything else. They get caught up. And I seemed to her to be, even though I was stressed out, even though I had a lot of anxiety, and even though I was depressed, I seemed like a person that could rationally discuss what all had happened to me. And she was, I think, surprised that I had good ways of putting it. Like, I don't know, one of the ways was like talking about that I had basically put my different lives, because it was like always a new beginning every time I was with somebody. It was a new chance at happiness or love or whatever you want to call it. But I could pick out things and kind of categorize the issues and where I went wrong, or the fact that I didn't acknowledge the red flags that I did see. And she said it's like you build up this brick wall and you've got everything pieced together just right. And you don't want to tear it down, because it's how you've, managed to keep your sanity. I don't know about that. I mean, yeah, I do feel like I built up somewhat of a brick wall. And I do feel like I categorized everything and kind of put it in its place. But I remember it. There's parts of my life I don't remember. That's true. But the parts of my life that I guess I have talked about the most, I do remember. Even though I may not remember every second, what I do remember is something that I've felt guilty, felt pain over, something that I realized a long time ago, basically, that I just never made the right decisions. And there's nothing I can do about it. You make all these bad choices in life, and then you just have to accept them. There's just no way to go back and redo it. Okay, so I'm going to get off here. My podcasts are always too long, and I don't mean for them to be. So I'm going to stop here, and I will see you next time. Please continue to listen, and thank you for listening to All Apologies.